On a summer morning in 2010, three city officials climbed the steps of a house in Tokyo to congratulate the oldest man in the city. He was turning 111. They had a certificate, they had flowers, and they had one small problem. The family wouldn't let them in. Not that day, not the next week, not for weeks after that. Always with a new excuse, each one stranger than the last. He was resting. He was meditating. He had, they finally said, turned himself into a living Buddha. When the door was finally forced open, the officials understood exactly why the family had fought so hard to keep it shut. Because the man they had come to honor as Tokyo's oldest citizen had been lying in that bed, behind that door, dead for 32 years. Welcome to Mortwick, the Dark Records. Today, the story of a man who was officially alive for 3 decades after he stopped breathing, and the single locked door that exposed a lie stretching across all of Japan. If you like stories that start behind a locked door and only get stranger, hit subscribe now, because unlike Mr. Kato's family, we actually want you to keep visiting. His name was Sogen Kato. On paper, he was one of the most respectable men in his neighborhood. Born in July 1899, he had lived through 2 world wars, the rise and fall of an empire, and the rebuilding of a nation from ash. By 2010, the record said he was 111 years old, which made him, officially, the oldest man in all of Tokyo. And Kato wasn't some forgotten hermit. He had a family. He lived in the family home, in a house full of children and grandchildren, in one of the most densely packed cities on Earth, where the neighbors are close enough to hear you sneeze. This is the detail to hold on to, because it's the one that makes everything that follows so hard to believe. Every September, Japan celebrates Respect for the Aged Day, a national holiday to honor its elderly, who are cherished as living treasures. And in a country that quietly competes to have the longest-lived people in the world, being the oldest man in your city is a genuine point of civic pride. So when the day came around, the local officials did what they always did. They went to pay their respects. The first visit should have taken 10 minutes, a handshake, a photo, a certificate for the family shrine. Instead, the officials were met at the door and told, politely but firmly, that Mr. Kato could not see them. He wasn't well, the family said. He didn't want visitors. He was in his room and preferred to be left alone. The officials nodded, apologized for the intrusion, and left. Reasonable enough. Old men have bad days. But the visits kept coming, because this was official business, and the answers kept changing. He was bedridden. He was a human vegetable who couldn't be disturbed. He had shut himself in his room decades ago, and the door simply couldn't be opened from the outside. And then the excuse that finally broke the whole thing apart. Sogen Kato had chosen to become a Sokushin Butsu, a monk who mummifies himself alive through years of ritual to reach enlightenment. Now, self-mummification is a real practice. Centuries ago, a handful of Japanese monks really did starve and dry their own bodies over years in the pursuit of holiness. But those monks lived in remote mountain temples in the Middle Ages. They did not do it in a suburban bedroom in modern Tokyo, while their granddaughter collected the mail. The excuse wasn't just strange. It was so strange that it stopped sounding like an answer and started sounding like a confession. The family guarded that bedroom door with the commitment of a nightclub bouncer protecting the VIP list, except the VIP had checked out in 1978.
By July 2010, the officials had had enough. A man who was supposedly 111, celebrated by the city, and yet no one outside his own family had laid eyes on him in living memory. So they did something they almost never do. They stopped asking, and they called the police. There was another thread pulling at them too: money. Kato was a widower, and his late wife's survivor's pension was still being paid into an account the family controlled. If he was as frail and hidden as they claimed, Someone was managing his affairs very carefully. The question quietly forming in every official's mind was no longer, is he well? It was, is he even there? On the 27th of July, 2010, they came back, this time with the authority to open any door they wanted. The family's excuses had finally run out, and the officials climbed the stairs to the room no outsider had entered in over 30 years. Behind the door was a small first-floor bedroom, ordinary in every way, a bed, a blanket, and in the bed, lying on his back, wearing underwear and pajamas, covered up as if he'd simply drifted off to sleep, was Sogen Kato. Except he had not drifted off recently. His body had mummified, dried and preserved by the dry, sealed air of that closed room. Sealed in that airless room for 3 decades, the body had preserved itself with the grim efficiency of a museum exhibit no one bought a ticket to see. He had been dead so long that the newspapers found near his body were from November 1978. The oldest man in Tokyo, the pride of the ward, the honored centenarian, had died more than 3 decades earlier, at the age of 79. He had been a corpse for longer than some of the officials standing over him had been alive. To put 1978 in perspective, the last time anyone confirmed this man was alive, Grease was in cinemas and the Bee Gees were still ruling the charts. He'd been keeping disco alive longer than John Travolta. 32 years. For 32 years, the family had lived in the same house, walked past that door, and kept the secret sealed inside it. And the obvious question is, why? Why hide a death for 1/3 of a century? The answer, it turned out, was written on those pension statements. Take a second to like this video and ring the bell. Do it now before you too get sealed behind a door and forgotten for 32 years. Because a dead man, on paper, is still worth money. As long as Sogen Kato was officially alive, the survivor's pension from his late wife kept flowing into the account, month after month, year after year, landing every single month with the loyalty of a Netflix subscription no one remembers signing up for, except this one had been auto-renewing since disco was king. Over the decades, investigators calculated the family had collected roughly 9.5 million yen, well over $100,000, off a man who hadn't drawn a breath in decades. In August 2010, the police arrested 2 of Kato's relatives, his daughter, Michiko, then 81 years old, and his granddaughter, Tokimi, 53. They were charged with fraud. The granddaughter, who had managed the household, eventually received a suspended prison sentence. Her defense, in essence, was that the family had drifted into the lie and never found a way out of it. And that's the part that lingers. This wasn't a dramatic murder plot. There was no evidence anyone killed Sogen Kato. As far as the investigation could tell, an old man died naturally in his bed in 1978. What his family did next was quieter and, in a way, sadder. They simply decided not to tell anyone. First out of grief, maybe, or shame. Then, once the pension kept arriving, out of habit. And a habit, given 30 years, hardens into a mummy of its own.
Here's where the story stops being about one strange house and becomes about an entire country. Because Kato's case made national news, and it made every ward office in Japan ask the same uncomfortable question. How many of our celebrated elderly are we sure are actually alive? So they checked, and the answer was staggering. When the government cross-checked its family registers, it found 234,000 people born before 1910 still officially on the books as alive, never crossed out. Almost all of them, the ministry admitted, were long dead. The paperwork had simply never caught up. 234,000 ghost entries the system never crossed out. Drop a comment. Do you think a case like this could still be quietly happening today? I read every one. I promise I check for a pulse. Some of them had simply moved away decades ago and never updated the records. Some had died abroad. But others were like Kato, quietly kept alive by families still collecting their benefits. Investigators even found a resident in Yamaguchi Prefecture still listed as alive at 139 years old, older than the light bulb, the telephone, and roughly the entire concept of the photograph. The records said he was alive. He had, of course, been dead for generations. The system that was supposed to honor Japan's oldest citizens had, it turned out, stopped actually looking at them. The paperwork kept them alive long after the world had let them slip away. Sogen Kato spent 32 years as a mummy in a bedroom in one of the busiest cities on the planet, a few feet from the people who loved him, honored by a government that never once checked whether he was breathing. He wasn't hidden by some criminal mastermind. He was hidden by grief, by money, and above all by a system that assumed the numbers on a form were the same thing as a living human being. The most unsettling part isn't the mummy, it's the question the case leaves behind. When the officials finally opened that door, they weren't just finding one dead man, they were finding out how easy it is for a person to disappear completely, while every record insists they're still here. That's the record. And the truly dark part is how many doors, right now, still haven't been opened. There are a lot more doors in the dark records still waiting to be opened. Subscribe so you're here when we open the next one.